All right, friends, there are more seats coming. So for those who haven't yet found a seat, this is a terrible problem to have, but we're solving it. Here, I'll hop up so you can see me. This is what happens when your rabbi's only 5'6". Good evening, everybody. There is a very famous Chinese proverb that says you should be cursed to live in interesting times. And I could go for a lot more boredom. When you think about what is just taking place in the Jewish world this week, where the state of Israel is at war on multiple fronts, where shots are ringing out with regularity in great Jewish communities like in Toronto, where an individual simply having supper at a restaurant and speaking Hebrew to his companion was assaulted by 3 people and beaten while everyone sat around and looked and then went back to their meal, tells us that we are living in times that I'm not sure any of us ever forecasted or could have imagined. There is inevitably, whenever we face trauma and trial in our life, we're asked by our souls to consider a certain question, which is why? And sometimes you can get answers to that question and sometimes not. But the question that you teach yourself to answer over time is not why, it's what now. Because what now is a question that we can answer much more readily and easily than perhaps the question why. But tonight we are truly blessed to have with us someone who can help us understand a bit of the why and can help us understand a little bit of the what now, and has dedicated his life and his work into making the world more boring and in alleviating the problems as the Jewish people have faced over the years as the chief diplomat of the Jewish people. So in a moment, I'm going to be blessed to invite Richard Cohen, who has helped sponsor this evening, to introduce our speaker, David Harris. But I want to express my gratitude to Mason Slane and his wife, Danielle. We, as many of you are aware, are in the midst of an endowment campaign at Temple Bethel. The purpose of the endowment is to ensure that the excellence that we try to offer the members of our congregation and community in everything we do, whether it's our ritual or our educational programs or the way in which we try to make the world a better place, all of the different elements of our congregation's life will have the resources to be as good as we want to be forever and not have to be worried about what might be the vicissitudes of the economy or the country. And so Mason was generous enough to create an endowment, and the purpose of that endowment is so that the congregation can be educated around the history of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. And so it is part of the proceeds of that endowment that are allowing us to have phenomenal events like we have tonight. So if you are interested in creating an endowment and joining that campaign, we encourage you please to be in touch with me or our development team at the synagogue, and you can add, we are already north of $29 million in commitments to our endowment campaign. We are hopeful to reach our goal of $36 million when we conclude the campaign next year. And so we encourage you to learn more about the campaign so that we can continue to make sure that Temple Bethel will be prosperous and strong long after no one remembers that I was the senior rabbi. It's my privilege to welcome Richard Cohen, who is on the executive committee of the American Jewish Committee and has done amazing things in the Jewish community and for the American Jewish Committee for many, many years. And we thank you for your help in bringing this event to come to pass tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi Dan. It's my great privilege to introduce an extraordinary man to this extraordinary congregation and Jewish community. It would be a disservice to just repeat what's on the back of his book in terms of his current credentials, but as Dan mentioned, he was the chief diplomat of the Jewish people worldwide, referred to by Shimon Peres, the former prime minister and president of Israel, as the de facto foreign minister of the Jewish people. And over the years that I've had the privilege to know David Harris and travel with him and attend meetings with him, I've seen that in action. My most recent memory being in Warsaw, where we were just weeks after the Ukraine war began. I was there in a room with Alan Rich, who's here in the front row, and in a small meeting with President Duda of Poland, who referred to David as Your Excellency. And this was a common occurrence. The leaders around the world in the diplomatic and executive communities, elected executives around the world knew David Harris, more so than many American Jews, but he was a name who opened doors because of all the things he did, from his work on behalf of Soviet Jewry to the breakup of the Soviet Union and his advocacy for NATO and EU admission at a time when so many were saying don't kick the bear with with Russia, and he's been honored by nation after nation. He is the most honored and distinguished and worthy Jewish leader I've had the privilege to meet in my lifetime. So without any further ado, here's David Harris.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and our apologies for the seating. I think everyone now has a seat. Anyone sitting on anyone's lap that wants to change that, you can let us know. But otherwise, it's an auspicious moment. I want to just begin by reflecting on that Richard and I had this conversation last summer, that wouldn't it be wonderful to invite David Harris here to Boca Raton and Temple Bethel, and we couldn't have imagined the world that we are in now. Last summer, the war in Gaza was still ongoing. There were still hostages who were not home safely, and we have seen all kinds of movement forward in those concerns. And then even 2 weeks ago when we were talking, we could not have imagined that we are finding ourselves where we are right now in the world. And so the conversation this evening was intended to be around anti-Semitism, and we will get there, I promise. But it would be a missed opportunity not to have a few moments to talk about the last 10 days and what has happened the last 10, 12 days, not only in Israel, but with the nations around in the Middle East and with Iran. And so, David, if I could ask you to begin by talking about the case for the war. The Islamic Republic has been waging war against the Western world, committing and funding terrorism, pursuing nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles for nearly 50 years. Why February 28, 2026?
Good evening.
Light question to start with.
I was sure the first question would be about my grandchildren. Maybe the second. Thank you, Bethel. Thank you, rabbis. Richard Cohen, thank you for those very touching words. There are many friends in the audience. If I name them all, I'll filibuster the question and other questions to follow. The case? I think the case is the fact that the alternative would be what? The fact that this has been going on since 1979 is not in and of itself a prima facie case to continue the same policies that have failed. The prospect of an Iran with nuclear weapons capability, ballistic missile capability, is too frightening to consider. Now, the problem, Rabbi, one of the problems is, and I'll put it squarely because it's going to be the elephant in the room the whole evening, and I'm sure elsewhere as well, that we are so politically divided that by definition, half the country will oppose the action, not because they necessarily oppose the action per se, but they oppose the action because the action was undertaken by a president that they did not vote for and do not value. And I am asking us, for the purpose of this conversation, this question, and the rest of the conversation, to leave that outside the door. To me, it's not relevant. The relevant question is, were there other policy tracks that could have brought about the same result of weakening Iran, denying it the nuclear path, and perhaps validating the tens of thousands of people who were killed by an Iranian regime that did not want to see their hair, much less their voice or their views. And I would argue, whether you voted for Donald Trump or not, and it's not relevant, again, for me, and people like Alan Rich and Richard Cohen know I've spent my life as a political independent. I say thank you, President Trump, for taking this decision. And I know that no previous president would have taken the decision because they didn't. They continue to believe, Rabbi, and I think this was the fundamental mistake. They continue to believe that Iran was a rational actor that would act rationally in Western terms. And they failed to grasp, just as so many failed to grasp in the 1920s and 30s, that one could not negotiate with Adolf Hitler. And in this case, Iran's ideology, its eschatology, its doctrine was not the rational doctrine that allowed for a compromise on the 50-yard line. So either you kick the can down the road hoping someone else picks up the issue, or you strike. And Donald Trump struck.
How are your grandchildren?
I thought you would never ask.
So here we are, and we are, all of us are, well, if you're like me, you're waking up and the first thing you're doing in the morning is you're checking your preferred Israel news outlet, whether it's Times of Israel or Ynet or Jerusalem Post, because they are 7 hours ahead of us and things happen to them before they happen to us. And just before we got together, we heard this afternoon that there was an expectation of a pretty intense evening, and so our prayers obviously are for peace in Israel and around the Middle East, and that everyone who may be in harm's way can find their way to a shelter as safely as possible. My next question has to do with, where is this war going to take us? What are our reasonable expectations for what the outcome might be? What are our highest hopes for what the outcomes might be? And what's going to bring this conflagration to a close to our satisfaction?
Well, first of all, I have to very gently remind you, Rabbi, that if you followed Psalm 121, you wouldn't have to wake up in the morning. Because the words of Psalm 21 are, "The guardian of Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep." So let's begin with the fact that somehow we all need to take that into account. But more seriously,
Amen.
I don't know, because it's not clear to me what Donald Trump thinks. And he has messaged different and sometimes contradictory messages about what the outcome is, number one. And number two, It's not clear to me that the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the United States, for all their remarkable cooperation, which is historic, are necessarily on the same page right now about how this should end, when this should end, where this should end. So it would be an act of chutzpah on my part to second guess them. But at the very least, at the risk of stating the obvious, Iran has to be sufficiently degraded that there is no chance whatsoever for them to reemerge any time in the foreseeable future. Now, saying that sounds very obvious, doesn't it? Except that we heard last June that the outcome of the 12-day war against Iran produced exactly that result. So if, in fact, it produced exactly that result last June, why are we now being told in February, March, that the new war is necessary? I think the new war is necessary because whatever we achieved in June, and I don't doubt we achieved, was insufficient, clearly. And secondly, Donald Trump said famously, help is on the way. And there were those who mocked him and questioned him because it didn't come immediately. But there has to be some global response to the tens of thousands of people who were killed. And interestingly, from the pro-Palestinian community, crickets. But they trapped themselves in a corner, Rabbi, because by their embrace of Hamas, explicitly or implicitly, how could they go against Hamas's sponsor, the mullahs of Iran? By their embrace of Hezbollah, how could they go against the sponsors of Hezbollah, the mullahs of Iran? So I think there are lots of good reasons to wage this war. I'm not in the Situation Room with the decision makers, above all the one decision maker in the United States who's the only person, I believe, who knows the answer to your question.
You spent your entire career looking out for the well-being of the Jewish people, domestically, in Israel, and around the world. And I want to ask you a few questions about how this war is affecting the well-being and the perceived status of Jews around the world. But I want to first give a special thank you to the members of our Anti-Semitism Social Justice Circle for the work that you have done over the past several months in guiding our congregation's conversation around this, but also for the several good questions that many of you offered to have this evening. So this is a question that comes from a member of our community who wrote, do you think the involvement of the Gulf states against Iran is positive or negative in general for Israel and for the United States?
That's an easy one. A huge, resounding yes. We are witnessing, I believe, with some skilled diplomacy, the reimagination of the Middle East. Number one, the countries that sat on the fence vis-a-vis Iran for years and tried to play all sides have been attacked. I'm sorry for the fact that they were attacked, but my goodness, what a game changer. Oman, the country that hosted the secret negotiations during the Obama administration that led to the 2015 deal, the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, the cleverest, I would actually say the slimiest of all the actors, Kuwait. These countries now have understood that there is no 50-yard line with Iran. Number one, and number two, who's going to save them? Irony of ironies. You can talk all you want about the United States, and God bless the United States and our armed forces. But without Israel, what would the intelligence look like for the armed forces to use on the ground? I mean, you want to kfel? This is one of the most extraordinary stories, I believe, in recorded history. The Israeli intelligence operation in Iran over years and years and years is something that should inspire total awe. They knew where everyone was. They knew where everything was. I mean, the guts, the grit, the valor, the ingenuity, the daring do is mind-boggling. And don't think the Omanis and the Kuwaitis and Bahrainis, whether they express it or not, don't know it. So I'll venture forth, Rabbi, a prediction that if skilled players in Washington seize the moment beyond the military operation itself, we could see a mini NATO emerge in the coming years in the Middle East. An American-oriented, Israeli-involved mini NATO with a remarkable strategic configuration, which could also potentially lead to more members of the Abraham Accords. So the two are not identical. There may be those in one, but not the other. But I think with the right chess players in Washington, in Jerusalem, this is a defining moment, maybe in a way almost not quite as defining as 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. This is a war, yes, but it's much more than a war. It's a defining moment in history. It's an inflection point, even though that term is overused. And we have to see it that way. There's no going back to the day before. And if there is, the diplomats should be punished for missing the opportunity.
Inspired by that vision, I hate to turn the conversation to places where there perhaps would be less diplomacy and less state personship, which would be the halls of Congress. But another question from our social justice circle leaders who wrote, what about concern for the loss of support for Israel, which was already in a tenuous situation in the halls of Congress? And you can take that question, I think, to the extremes on both sides of the aisle. Everything you just described seemed like an incredible advancement, not just for the Jewish people and not just for Israel, but really for the entire region and for the world in terms of its stability, comparing it to the fall of the Soviet Union. And yet, here domestically, a lot of folks are not seeing it that way. What's going on in Congress?
Well, allow me, Rabbi, to step back because there's something I came here to say. I think, and I've said it pretty consistently since October the 8th, we need to understand that we can no longer play by an October 6th playbook. It served its purpose in many cases, but we need an October 8th playbook. And it's 2.5 years later, and I'm still frustratingly not seeing the October 8th playbook. Let me put it in dramatic terms. October 7th revealed that Israel's conceptia, a Hebrew word which I hope all of you have learned, it's conceptia meaning that Hamas would not attack, was so embedded in so many places in Israel that even when the evidence suggested that it might attack, it was rejected by the decision makers. So we can talk about what failed, as Israel talked about what failed in October 1973, the Yom Kippur War. But to Israel's enormous credit, by October the 8th, Israel was recovering its decision-making powers and understood that they needed a new conceptia, and it couldn't wait. And lo and behold, within a matter of weeks, Israel was at war on 7 fronts, kinetic war, real war, on 7 fronts. And you've seen the results. I mean, the genius of the Hezbollah action. That's just one illustration. And now, of course, Iran. How about the ouster of Assad in Syria and the reimagining of Syria? How about a Lebanese government that at least rhetorically claims it now wants finally to contain and control Hezbollah? The changes have been profound, and only more so in recent weeks. That's one half of the screen. And from here, we can go, rah, rah, go Israel. The other half of the screen is not quite as clear to me. What's the new conceptia of the American Jewish community? Why do I ask? Because, folks, we're in trouble. And it needs to be obvious to all of us, whether we live in Boca Raton or in New York or in Chicago or Scottsdale. We are in the process, again, please don't shoot the messenger. We are in the process before our eyes of losing the Democratic Party. And if you're a Republican, don't cheer. Because in any democracy, the pendulum will swing. And one day it'll be Republicans in power, and the next day it'll be Democrats in power. And we, the Jewish people, and we, Friends of Israel, cannot afford to wait 4 or 8 years to outlive a Zohran Mamdani or whoever may be the leadership in Washington. And one of the most recent votes in the U.S. Senate on arms transfers to Israel before the ceasefire, 27 of 44 Democratic senators voted against. I'm not asking Democrats to join the Republican Party. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a partisan. I'm asking Democrats in this room to stop being played for fools. They want your vote. They want your money. They want your endorsement. Make sure you get what you need from the party before you give any of those 3. Because otherwise, to borrow a Hebrew word, you're being played for friars. What's a friar?
A naive fool.
A sucker. A naive fool. We're in the process. You heard Gavin Newsom? Considered part of the mainstream of the party? All moving away from mainstream positions on the U.S.-Israel alliance? You've heard how many now saying we are rejecting any aid from AIPAC? Something is happening before our eyes. And if you're Republicans, there's no schadenfreude here. It's one country. And I can tell you as well that it's not clear to me what happens when Donald Trump becomes a lame duck and who gains ownership of the MAGA movement. There are clearly splits in the party. And it's not at all certain that the Israel-friendly wing of the party will prevail. So to Republicans in the room, and we need both Democrats and Republicans, we need you acting within Republican bodies to ensure continued Republican support. We had the most recent Gallup poll, which for the first time in history, I believe, said more Americans support the Palestinians than Israelis. If that's not a second wake-up call, I don't know what is. And thirdly, as was said earlier by the senior rabbi and by you, Greg, in San Jose, California, where my eldest son and his Israeli wife and their Hebrew-speaking children were living until recently, a similar situation. Someone heard Hebrew and 3 people pounced on the Hebrew speaker and no one lifted a finger to help. It could easily have been my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandchildren in San Jose, California. And we can go down a longer and longer and longer list of synagogues, kosher restaurants, JCCs, Jewish day schools, all of which are feeling increasingly vulnerable. Where is our new conceptia? We can't simply play along as if all we need is one more interfaith Passover Seder, or a billboard near the Lincoln Tunnel that says, in effect, if you like your cherry tomatoes in your salad, thank Israel. That's not a conceptia. And if we allow this to continue to hemorrhage, the signs are all on the wall, and no one can ask, where were we? Why didn't we know? They're all there staring us in the face. The problem is, I think it was either Goethe or Heine said, the hardest thing for us to see is what's staring us in the eyes. Where is the American Jewish conceptia?
So help us see what is right in front of our eyes. You have been leading the Jewish community in this conversation, and I was thinking earlier today about the heady days of the 1900s. My kids think that's a long time ago. Many of us in this room either witnessed or were the beneficiaries of a time when the Jewish community in America went from being somewhat outsiders. Boca Raton used to be restricted, and now it is a place that may be the most vibrant Jewish community in the entire country, and that includes New York City in that consideration. And we had incredible success as a people for 40, 50, 60 years. And then it feels like in a blink of an eye, although it's not really a blink of an eye, which you're going to teach us in a moment, things are moving in the opposite direction. What did we do to build that acceptance and that place in our community 40, 50, 60 years ago? And then we're going to talk about what changed and how it happened so quickly. Because that was a concepcia of that time that worked very well for us.
It worked very well, and it produced the golden age of which I dare say everyone in this room was a beneficiary. I can honestly say, Rabbi, though I'm the first person in my entire extended family born in the United States, just after the war, that I experienced no hurdle, no impediment, no minefield to my life as an American and a Jew. And to our 3 adult sons, if anything, they had even fewer than my non-existent hurdles, obstacles, and minefields. Unfortunately, I can say with certainty, not speculation, that our 8 Jewish grandchildren will not have the same journey. I know it. I know it not because I'm fear-mongering, because I already see. I already see in the choice of schools. I already see in when my daughter-in-law speaks Hebrew and when she doesn't, and how loud or how quietly when she's in public spaces. I see it through their social media relationships. I see how many friends and even family our family has dropped since October the 7th. Because we can't be in the same room. And this one is too big to compartmentalize and say, you know what, let's agree we'll talk about the weather. Can't do it. Can't do it. So what happened to that golden age? Well, maybe one way of trying to ask the question is, what happened that led the Democratic Party in the year 2000 to invite Shomer Shabbat, kashrut-observing Joe Lieberman to be the vice presidential candidate to Al Gore, and 24 years later, when faced with the challenge of 7 battleground states that everyone on both sides of the aisle agreed would determine the next president of the United States, the Democratic Party rejected the most likely person to help the party cross the line. Again, I don't say that as a partisan, but if you want to answer the question you asked, or we have to be able to answer the question of what happened in those 24 years within the Democratic Party. Or I'll frame it differently because my friend Alan Rich is here.
Right here.
Here. The hardest thing to see is what's right in front of your eyes. My youngest son went to his alma mater and entered in 2007 or 8. And we would call him every day or so and say, Bubala, so how are things there? And he would say, Mom, Dad, everything's perfect at Cornell. The president, the trustees, the number of Jewish students, the power and the strength and the activism of the Jewish community. Dad, focus on other places. I have a colleague where I'm now associated at ISCAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism Policy. Misha Galperin, some of you may know him from the Federation world. His son, very similar to my son, entered Cornell 2 years ago. Proudly Jewish, very pro-Israel, and he practically has to wear body armor. Unless we can answer the question of what happened in those 2 decades, roughly, we're not going to get closer to a conceptia because we're simply going to be nibbling around the edges. And what happened is tough to talk about because many Jewish audiences don't want to engage these issues. They simply want to believe this is a blip on the screen, or they dislike Bibi Netanyahu, so the moment he disappears, we'll return to the status quo ante, or they don't like Donald Trump, so the moment he's out, things will return and all will be hunky-dory. But that fails to ignore certain things. I'll just give you headlines. And again, please don't ascribe to me partisan motives because there are none. Social media. Tell me one Jewish leader who has 17 million followers on Twitter. Maybe there is, I don't know who that is. Jewish leader. You know who has 17 million followers just on Twitter? Tucker Carlson. Tell me one Jewish leader who has 7 million followers just on Twitter. Now, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, I don't know one. Candace Owens has more than 7 million followers just on Twitter. So people who want to sit on the sidelines and kind of slough this off and say, I don't follow social media, so I don't care. You don't get a pass. 17 million people are being exposed every day to someone who's become a neurotic, obsessive, 24/7 anti-Semite. And I can list for you a few others in the category. And I can cite for you how many followers they have. Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Zohran Mamdani, Jeremy Corbyn, Francesca Albanese. Keep going. So unless we can declare an algorithmic war, we're going to lose this battle big time, number one. Number two, immigration. Third rail issue. How dare David even mention the issue? Weren't we all immigrants to America? Don't we all have Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island and Galveston stories? But to ignore the issue, to ignore what we see with our own eyes in these encampments and protests, and who's helping to fill them, and not ask the question, what exactly is going on? Or why, for example, Germany, Germany, has changed its citizenship questions to include a battery of questions on Israel, Jews, and the Holocaust in order to send a message that any naturalized German must understand. These are non-negotiable issues. You may lie, but if you lie, we have a legal basis to pursue you. But if we're simply going to continue to live with the aura of Ellis Island without asking about the impact of migration on changing attitudes, we're missing a story. Number 3, Rabbi, how about DEI? Whatever its original intention was, and I'll generously ascribe good intentions, it has been hijacked in too many places, workplaces, in universities, and elsewhere. And it has been transformed into a binary ideology in which Jews are seen as white, as wealthy, as powerful, and as privileged. So we're on the wrong end of DEI. And maybe that helps explain why, when I was asked quietly to try and help my alma mater, Penn, get out of a hole it dug for itself, the dean admitted that whereas until a few years ago up to 1/3 of the student body was Jewish, it's now barely 12%, according to them. Have we become dumber in recent years? Or has something changed? I'm not saying that any of these issues have easy answers, but if we're not prepared to identify the real issues and not the faux, F-A-U-X issues, you know, if only we're just a little nicer, if only we just give one more contribution to the zoo or the museum or the ballet or the baseball field, people will like us more. Give to all those worthy causes because they're worthy causes, but don't give because you think that the consequence of that will be a change in attitude. We've spent 2,000 or more years, as I was reminded in 2 lonely years writing this book, trying to convince majority populations that we were not evil, we were not the other, we were not the outsider, we were not unassimilable. We simply went to a different place to worship on Saturday rather than Friday or Sunday. In theory, to the same God. Monotheistic religions all. But that strategy didn't work all that well, did it? Yes, we, thanks to Israel, created the cherry tomato. And yes, thanks to Salk and Sabin, children don't have polio anymore, at least if they take the vaccine. And yes, I can give you 1,000, 10,000 other Jewish contributions to human civilization in this country and around the world. But if that's our conceptia to solve the problems we face, then I think we have the wrong conceptia, Rabbi.
I heard an audible breath coming from the room. That was the conceptia. That was the conceptia in 2000. Right? When you talked about the way that our community was able to have one of ours become invited to be the vice president in 2000, and you've illustrated a little bit of where we are today, but in the thought you put into the book that you wrote, which we encourage everyone to read because there's so much information there, there are moments, and there were things that happened in those 24 years. There were things that was going on in Europe while things seemed okay here in the U.S. There are, and this is going to sound conspiratorial, and I don't mean it that way, there were forces at play, right? There were people, there were institutions that that added to the national dialogue that got us from 2000 to 2024. And you say these are hard things to hear. I think we can hear. I think we can understand what you have to share. In order for us to make a concepcia for going forward, we really have to wrap our minds around what really is at play.
Right.
What's really at play?
Well, I saved the best for last. The reason I joined ISCAP, and maybe this is an infomercial for ISCAP, but there's a reason behind it, is because I thought too many of the Jewish organizations were tinkering at the edges. Again, I repeat myself. What ISCAP, long before I came on board, was revealing was something that many of you instinctively know in your business and other lives. 3 words: follow the money. What ISCAP revealed was that the largest foreign funder of American higher education in recent years is, if you know it, thank ISCAP. And what exactly is Qatar? Other than a tiny speck of land, 350,000 citizens at most, 10,000 miles away? What interest could they possibly have in the curriculum at Georgetown University or Northwestern University, or for that matter, Cornell University or Columbia University and so many others? But then, as these researchers peeled away, they discovered a baya, B-A-Y-A. Does anyone know what that term means? It's a spiritual oath that the Qatari leadership took to the Muslim Brotherhood. But some people say, the Muslim Brotherhood, that sounds like an Islamic version of B'nai B'rith. So, David, why should you get upset? No. The Muslim Brotherhood, as we have been reminded now, was founded in 1929 in Egypt, and for nearly a century has had a very singular goal. And this is not conspiracy, Rabbi, because Swiss intelligence in the 1980s and the FBI in the 1990s in this country found documents about the century-long project of the Muslim Brotherhood to divide, weaken, and fragment America, to drive a wedge between the United States and Israel, and to use anti-Semitism as a tool. So, now go back to October 8th, 2024. The IDF had not yet responded.
23, you mean?
I'm sorry, 23, thank you. The IDF had not yet responded. It was still assembling and thinking it through. And what happened on October 8th, 2023? 34 student organizations where? Harvard. Got together and very quickly issued a statement that blamed October 7th solely and exclusively on Israel. The target of genocide was declared to be the perpetrator of genocide before the IDF had even responded. How was it possible that at our preeminent university, obviously other than the University of Florida, or Florida State, I don't want to get into those debates, what kind of a mindset? What kind of faculty? What kind of students could reach this conclusion so quickly and so decisively and never look back? Columbia University, from our place in New York, we can practically walk to Columbia University. I grew up in the shadow of Columbia University. What can I say? or to imagine that it was principally young people, we're told, who elected our mayor in New York. Young people who are sort of stereotyped as products of the humanities and social sciences and liberal arts colleges and universities in the United States of America. To believe in the warmth of collectivism. Do you understand what that means? The warmth of collectivism? That's Bolshevism. And to believe that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free should not be condemned. And whose wife, thanks to the free press, we now know, has liked more than 70 different tweets that denied rape, denied sexual violence, and everything else that happened on October the 7th, or celebrated it. To the credit of this administration, and again, we have one administration at a time, give me another administration, I'll try and find credit to give. This president has now issued executive orders to designate the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, in Jordan, in Lebanon, and this week in the Sudan as foreign terrorist organizations. No American president, Democrat or Republican, had done that before. It's late in the day. I give a big shout out again to ISCAP because it was at the top of the policy agenda. But why are these partisan issues? Just like Iran, why is it a partisan issue? And that frightens me most of all, Rabbi, because if we cannot unify as a nation in understanding the threat that Iran poses to its own people, to neighboring countries, Arab allies, neutral countries, if we can't understand that as a nation and not just as half a nation, I submit we're in deep trouble going forward. Very deep trouble.
We can't end there, so we're not going to.
I'm just getting warmed up.
Well, it is our eternal need to have a conversation around hopefulness. That is our people's national, it's how we orient ourselves to the world. And I want to read another question that came from a member of our social justice circle, which is, give us marching orders. How do we confront this?
Buy the book.
That's one order.
Gift the book.
Yeah. We have this new amalgamation, this new manifestation of anti-Semitism, and in the book you'll learn about all the ways and the fact that it's a conspiracy theory, and it will make itself to be whatever that generation, that people, those who wish to use it need it to be, and yet we're still here.
And we will be here.
Yeah. How?
And our best days lie ahead. And that's not a throwaway political line.
But we have work to do.
If you understand the history of our people, there's no way in hell that we are going to collapse. By the way, I want to answer the question about marching orders, and this is all unscripted, but I'm grateful for the question. But I want to say that I think right now Israel is light years ahead of us. And I see the new greatest generation of Israel. These extraordinary young people, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, many of whom had finished their IDF service, who had that traditional year in Goa or in the salt flats of Bolivia. And when the country called 300,000 Miluim reservists to come back, how many came back? 350,000 showed up. Half of them hated Bibi Netanyahu, I'm sure. I'm just guessing from the polling numbers on any day in Israel. Half of them opposed judicial reform. Half of them disliked the settlers and whatever mishugas they're doing. And none of it mattered. None of it mattered. there is a new great generation. If Tom Brokaw were interested, he could write the sequel to his legendary book here. Israel has a bright future. Those young people will ensure that bright future. I'm frankly much more worried about our future. And that flips it because many American Jews keep saying, Oy gewollt, oy wes mir, poor Israel. No. Israel learned to dance in the bomb shelters. Israel celebrated Purim while singing I Will Survive, the Gloria Gaynor story. Israelis got married in the bomb shelters. Their resilience is extraordinary. I don't worry as much about them as I do about us. And I think, Rabbi, because we're at Bethel right now, the marching orders begin right here, if you allow me.
Please.
Right here. Rabbi, if you'll permit me as a guest. We have a generation of young people, maybe as young as 5, 6, 7, 8, certainly by their teens, who are increasingly frightened about what it means to be a public Jew, or what it means to show your support for Israel. A few years ago, it would have been easy, very easy. Being Jewish was cool. Seinfeld made it a lot cooler, and you can add. Now, to put an exclamation point on it, someone I know very well, and one or two other people here know this person as well, who made such a strenuous effort after her own conversion to Judaism to raise her son and daughter as proud, knowledgeable, literate Jews. And her 14-year-old daughter came to her a few months ago and said, Mommy, I want to opt out. And the mother was heartbroken and asked, why? And the daughter said, the price is too high. The first marching order for me is internal. Before we talk about organizations and lawfare and advocacy strategies and voting patterns externally, we need to create a generation of proud, knowledgeable, literate, confident, not arrogant Jews. We need to be unapologetic in teaching them about Zionism. It's not an a la carte menu. Our identity rests on 3 pillars: a people, a faith, and a land. And we don't get to configure them as we wish. Well, we're not so comfortable with Zionism, so we'll spend more time on faith, and we'll interpret faith broadly, so everything becomes tikkun olamized. God bless tikkun olam, but we have no monopoly on good deeds. So, at home, and a special plea to grandparents who are often the transmission belts of identity. Parents are often too busy. Grandparents, parents, rabbis, educators, others. Strengthen the spine, expand the heart, and widen the mind about what being Jewish means and why there's joy and not just oi. Because otherwise, how many more will opt out? That's the internal. Externally, do you want me to keep going?
Sure.
No, you want to
Keep going.
Externally, look, obviously we have a huge challenge with security. I remember well going with a couple of AJC leaders, maybe in 2016, to Sweden, which had a very problematic government. and meeting with the leadership of the Jewish community who took us to the Jewish day school in Stockholm. And they told us two things that I haven't forgotten. One, the Jewish community of Sweden at the time was spending 22% of its entire budget on security. Not on education, not on support for Holocaust survivors, not on camping, on security. And number two, that after the synagogue in Copenhagen was attacked and the volunteer was killed, the Swedish community asked the Swedish government for police protection of the day school. And the Swedish government appointed, I think, 2 policemen at a time to be there. But by the time we got to Stockholm, we were told the policemen had protested because they told their officers that they were being put in harm's way. And they were withdrawn. That left the security entirely to the community. We have to take security very, very seriously. And unfortunately, the message is nowhere is safe, no matter how much you may think a particular place is safe. But I think most importantly of all, we need a war mindset. Forgive me for using the word war. But there is a global war. There is a global war that has been declared against the state of Israel, against friends of Israel, and increasingly that blurs the distinction in our own mind between a synagogue, for example, and the state of Israel. How else to explain why 15 people were killed at a Chabad event on Bondi Beach? By the way, not for supporting Israel, though they have every right to, but for lighting the first candle of Hanukkah. The synagogue in Manchester, England. The synagogues in Toronto that have been attacked. I can keep going. We need a war cabinet. We need a war plan. We need war leaders who move us to a new conceptia. And the conceptia focuses on internal education, as we've spoken about. It focuses on security, which to some extent is happening, but I think still insufficiently. And it focuses on regaining ground. We cannot allow to see one or both political parties leave us behind and abandon the state of Israel. And I can tell you, this is not speculation, this is certainty. The long-term goal of our adversaries, and I've said this for years and years and years, long before October 7th, has been to drive a wedge between Washington and Jerusalem. Please understand, if there is a president of the United States of whatever party who one day does not instruct our ambassador to the United Nations to veto a resolution under Chapter 7, which is legally enforceable against the state of Israel, all bets are off. And there are precedents with Iraq and with Libya on banning all weapon sales and weapons transfers. If an American president hems and haws and does not give that instruction, everything will have changed in an instant. So again, you may say, and I get it, shmum, which is a Hebrew way of saying, who cares about the UN? It's a play on the UN's initials in Hebrew, shmum. Just like you might say, who cares about Tucker Carlson? And I'm telling you...
17 million people do.
And that's only on Twitter. Keep adding on the other platforms. So what's our strategy? How do we regain primacy in both political parties? How do we dismantle the ideology which, whatever its good intentions at the beginning, has infected and in some respects poisoned university environments? And how do we make clear that from now on we're going to be much smarter voters? Please, be active in both parties. We need you in both parties. But don't be a schlemiel. You can see for yourself what's happening to the parties. Don't play along. Push back. Fight back. Go up the ladder. So, Rabbi, from my point of view, we need an awful lot. We need it yesterday. We don't have the luxury of time because right now in Israel, time is working in favor of Israel. I would argue that here, time is working against us.
In a couple of weeks, we're going to gather around our Seder tables to celebrate the holiday of Pesach and reflect on a time when our people knew from really strong oppression, and they hoped beyond hope, and with the interceding of the Holy One, they went free. And I'm curious what message you're going to be sharing. You talked about this starts in the home. This starts with the family. What is the message that you're going to be talking with your family about on Seder night in a couple of weeks?
Well, with the younger ones, it's going to be, why can't we watch Peppa Pig? But more seriously, and ignoring them for the time being, though they're noisy enough they can't be easily ignored. I think for our family, there's a perfect answer to that question. Because we, my wife and I in particular, have witnessed 2 modern-day exoduses. Much as we will retell the story of Egypt and the plagues and all the other wonderful symbolic and substantive elements of my favorite holiday, I have seen up close 2 modern-day exoduses. I have seen, beginning in 1969, I believe, when 19 families in Soviet Georgia took the remarkably brave act of writing to the United Nations, which could have landed them in jail or even perhaps dead. And what was their message? I'll translate it. Shelach et ami.
Let my people go.
Atpusti narod moy. Any Russian speakers? Let my people go. The few against the many. Every theme of Jewish history, which speaks to our, not just survival, that sets the bar too low. We don't survive for the sake of surviving. We survive because we have something we believe in. We have something to offer, something to share. I have seen with my own eyes a nes gadol, a big miracle. Soviet Jews were consigned to a policy of cultural genocide with the purpose of extinguishing the last flicker of Jewish light among millions. And what happened? Those 19 became who became. And before you knew it, the sealed borders of the Soviet Union were open to crack. And before you knew it, more than 1 million Jews from the Soviet Union made their way to Israel and rejuvenated Zionism, and 500,000 or more came to the United States. And they created in Germany the fastest growing Jewish community in the world, interestingly. It should never have been. The Soviet Union was the most ruthless, hermetically sealed, authoritarian organization on the planet, and we beat them. They beat them. Natan Sharansky spent 9 years in the Gulag. His longest hunger strike, if I recall, was over 100 days. They couldn't break Natan Sharansky. And on the day they finally released him in exchange for Soviet spies, at that famous bridge in Germany, his Soviet captors said to him, "Sharansky, walk straight across." And in his final FU to the Soviets, he zigzagged across. Folks, that spirit, the spirit of the young people in Israel today, is a spirit that can't be broken, and that will be a spirit we convey at our Seder table. And the other exodus that I saw with my own eyes and my own hands and my own feet was in a place that very few people will have ever visited, Gondar province in northwestern Ethiopia. I saw Jews beginning in the early 1980s when I visited who didn't even know that Yerushalayim existed as a living, breathing, throbbing, thriving city and capital of the state of Israel. It was in their mythological beliefs, in their yearning, in their prayers, in their dreams. But they were so isolated. They lived in huts that had no electricity, no glass, much less news about what was happening thousands of miles away. They were persecuted relentlessly by Muslim and Christian neighbors over the years. And they never lost their faith. And how many of us today realize that on our watch, thousands of Ethiopians died, carrying their elderly and their children on their backs across hostile territory in neighboring Sudan in an effort to escape with the help of the Mossad and others. I played a small role in that symphony orchestra, but enough of a role to understand, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, this is not a political pitch to make you feel a little better before you leave, because I want your vote. There's no voting. The Ethiopian Jews, the Soviet Jews, the young Israelis who are facing the most demonic, barbaric force on earth are what we need to convey at our Seder table, at our Shabbat table, in our dinner conversations, wherever. Our best days lie ahead. And it's not by accident that Israel's national anthem is called Hatikva. There's a reason. And I think the reason is in rooms like this, Rabbi, and my hope is, quite honestly, that as a result of this evening, if I may be allowed to say it, whatever you've been doing, and for many it's been an awful lot, do something more tomorrow morning. Whatever you're doing, God bless you, but don't invoke Dayenu. It's not enough. It's not enough because we have a lot of work to do in this country. We have a lot of work to do, and I'll end by referencing Surfside, because we're here in southern Florida. As I understand it, when the structural engineers were called in, they saw the weakness of the structural integrity of the building. And the choices were pretty stark. Spend a lot of money to fix it, or hold your breath, kick the can down the road, and hope the building stands up for another few decades, and it's someone else's responsibility. There are cracks in the foundation of everything we built in the post-war era. They're fixable. We're not running for the hills. We're not all running to New Zealand if we're not choosing Israel. Our battle is here. And with the inspiration of our tradition and our people and the examples, the real life examples that I've tried to mention, I'll borrow from Nessun Dorma, for those of you who like opera. What's the last word in the most famous opera, famous aria of Vincerò? What does vincerò mean in Italian? I will win. I will conquer. And I want to say, if I can borrow from the Italian and from Nessun Dorma, vinceremo. Vinceremo. We will win. We will win.
Amen. David, you have served the Jewish people in so many interesting ways for so many decades, but for the last hour and 20 minutes, you have served us so well. And so all we can say to you is thank you, and let us be victorious together. Join us. Join us in the hallway. We have a reception for some yummies, an evening for everyone. And again, thank you to everyone who leaves tonight. Please, it's dark. It got dark out. It's nighttime. Drive safely.